Welcome to Nell and Matt's Obsolete Movies, the podcast where we revisit our 20 plus years of collecting films on obsolete formats. This episode is Ken Russell's Altered States. From 1980, and in 1980, Altered States was, I guess, kind of a big deal. It was a prestige picture, I think. Yeah. The box says the score was nominated for an Oscar. And we have it on VHS. Getting it from, I believe, the Kmart in Edgewood Town Center, which has been closed for years. And actually, until we watched it, this VHS tape was still in the cellophane, as you can tell by our Instagram. If you follow us on Instagram, Nell and Matt's Movies, Nell and Matt's Movies, we opened it live on camera or whatever. Let's dive into
this movie.
This movie. Let's talk about the film.
I think
Let's talk about the film.
I think for me one of the interesting things is it's William Hurt's first film that he did. So what a way to start your film career in Hollywood, playing this particular role.
Yes, where he's naked for a good third of the picture.
But you do not see his genitalia, which I think is very interesting. Right. So it's perceived nakedness.
Well, you see his ass a lot. So
that's true.
He might have been butt casted, or I don't think it's a body double, but
yeah. And if you're a fan of Stranger Things, this movie, his first one was definitely borrowed for Stranger Things. So when Eleven is going into those other states, they use a very similar tank. Yes. So as we know, the creators of Stranger Things like to reference other films, and they definitely reference Altered States.
And a lost to history, I think I only know about it because, again, in college, we had a professor who was a Jungian who was really into this film. It was really Jungian, really into Ken Russell, really into this film. So this is not a film a lot of people, I think, are going to know or remember.
So Eddie Jessup is a psychiatrist who's studying schizophrenia. And so he initially starts out using the deprivation tank to basically cut himself off from all stimulus to see what's happening, and it was supposed to be a way of him studying schizophrenia. However, it progresses over time into something much different than the initial intention, which I will say, so like that part actually is kind of interesting to me because the mechanisms that cause schizophrenia, right? There's a lot of theories out there. Whether it's like a dopamine issue, whether it's bilateralism in the brain. A lot of schizophrenics actually are left-handed, so there's like this kind of interesting research around potentially why. But one of the theories out there, the filter mechanisms that allow us to screen out a lot of stimuli are not functioning appropriately for schizophrenics. And also like recall. So you might have a memory from childhood that suddenly floods into your brain. It makes me think of when my grandmom was going blind. And if her brain was like struggling to fill in for information and would occasionally pull like a memory from years past. And so you could be sitting with her and she would say, "I see the children running in the house." And there was no children. She was in her 90s. So, part of it is that, is the brain is not necessarily able to function the way it should, and it's not filtering out stimulus. So in some ways, like the deprivation tank would almost, if you believe that the deprivation tank would schizophrenic, that your brain isn't able to filter.
A brain deprived of external stimulus, right? So the idea of the central deprivation tank is this, body temperature, salt water mixture there's enough salt that it makes a human body buoyant, and you're supposed to kind of float naked in the darkness, body buoyant, and you're supposed to kind of float naked in the darkness and the quiet. and whatever's maybe in the back of your subconscious now can come rushing and flooding into the, because you don't have your phone to look at or whatever, or the hecticness of modern life or whatever, the overstimulation, all of that is gone. And so, he's doing this research on patients and then starts doing the research on himself. Yes.
And I guess we should also mention John Lilly was the one who invented the deprivation tank. He was the one who came up with the concept of floating in salt water and to block off all stimuli for it. So he initially started out as a pretty regular researcher and physician, and he kind of took this quite this turn, but so he believed in trying the deprivation tank. Then he met up with like Timothy Leary and some other countercultural figures, and he started combining the use of LSD and other drugs for people while they're in the deprivation tank to further their experience. But he's probably most infamous for the Peter studies of the dolphin. So if you, it's kind of actually been a joke.
Google that.
You have to Google it.
Google it.
I want to say Drunk History did a thing on it. Saturday Night Live definitely did a skit on it.
Google it.
But he ends up doing a study where dolphins cohabitate with human beings and things really go off rails. But so the book, the author of the book actually did a lot of research around what Lilly was doing, and that was a big influence on what was happening within the book.
Yeah, and so then it's this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. This is a film that very much they mention Faust in the film, this idea of selling your soul to the devil for knowledge, which I guess you could say happens in this film.
Yeah.
So there's that. There is Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. There is a potion that the William Hurt character takes, who then, you always struggle with films like this and spoilers, but it not only alters his consciousness, but you could say it also alters his DNA. He goes back to this original soul or whatever, and he becomes this sort of Neanderthal man or something, or this missing link, and there's a scene where he goes to the zoo and like kills a goat with his bare hands because he's hungry and whatever, but yet still maintains, even as he's recalling this later, his like cold clinical distant college professory. Well, yes, I was so exhilarated by it, or what? I don't know why I can't do pretension and not do a British accent. Sorry, British people, but it's just how that works.
He's not a very likable character.
He is not a likable character,
and I think that. In the beginning of the movie, actually, even the seduction scene with his future wife is really bizarre.
AKA grad student in his department.
Yeah.
Which we need to talk about that at some point. Yes.
Why don't we talk about? So I think there's a couple things that we need to touch on with this film, but I do think the portrayal who shows up every day and teaches and does the right thing.
Well. Here's what I'll say, though. They do get right, and this was triggering, and I felt seen while watching this film. And I think about my own past as an insufferable graduate student, because all graduate students, I think, in order to survive graduate school, to get a doctorate, have to go through this phase where you feel like you are, well, Mr. Ramsey from To the Lighthouse, where you're trying to be the one that gets to Z in the alphabet, and one mind of a generation gets to Z, and maybe, like, in the novel, I think, maybe Mr. Ramsey thinks he's an R. He got to R, but not to Z. This idea, what Virginia Woolf sometimes called the prick of Z, this idea... What Virginia Woolf sometimes called the prick of steel Victorian intellect. It just sees so clearly and has such knowledge and is creating new knowledge for the world. And I will say there is an element of that in college professor life, and an attractive element of that. Like the idea, I have a colleague who once said that, in the 80s, Derrida had 12 one-month contracts and would literally go around the world, and especially around the United States, and for a month be member of an England that, the month Derrida was there, who got to see, he, the people in the department, and at the time he was an insufferable graduate student, felt like they were in the intellectual center of the universe. So you almost need that, like, Lone Ranger gunslinger attitude.
I think it's also interesting.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if this film does a lot of things right, but that might be one of them.
So we, to disclose, both Matt and I have our doctorates, and Matt is in higher education.
Yes.
So I think it's also the fact, and you and I had this conversation before, because there are people who'll go from college to master's to doctorate, and this is definitely what Eddie Jessup has done. So he has his doctorate by the time he's 24, 25, and you think of the choices that he makes at 24 or 25 are very typical of what a 24 or 25 year. The choices that he makes at 24 or 25 are very typical of what a 24 or 25 year old would do. Because we don't want to think about it, but even into our 20s, we're still maturing.
Yeah.
And so I think that gunslinger motive that you're talking about is really also part of maturity.
And also you throw in there this game.
Also part of maturity.
Also you throw in there this game where it's prestige. Harvard gets name dropped several times in this film. It's like, oh, you're at Columbia. Well, this person's at Harvard.
Yeah.
And that there is that element to higher ed and higher ed careerism, that the Jessup character, his motivations are sometimes hard. And I wonder what sort of non-academics or people who aren't familiar with that world would think of this film today. Mm-hmm. But that helps some of the motivation and threatening to his own life and threatening to the safety of other people. It's, in his mind, totally worth it, and totally, yes, I'm being responsible because if I don't discover this, who will? We will break through, uses for this, who will? Will break through, uses the term breakthrough a lot.
I think his wife, Emily, mentions at one point that he's a truth seeker, and he whatever he's doing is the need to find the truth, and he kind of doesn't care what he does to get to what his perceived truth, and it doesn't care what he does to get to what his perceived truth is during it. So, as you mentioned, it is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story in that sense of that he kind of is actually kind of jerky.
Oh yeah, he's insufferable.
Yeah, he's a jerky kind of guy. So when he goes through his his phase of becoming the bad guy, is just kind of like him ramped up on it. But he is kind of like, he's not a nice character. He is going through this transformation, and he does it because he doesn't really care about his ability to do his research and to take himself to that next level. Which, actually, think about it, I was thinking about Midsommar while we were watching this, right? And the need for... Oh, yeah, that's another, grad students are horrible people, film. And so, which, again, if you're not in higher ed, you don't understand the motivation. And I get, for someone who's gotten a PhD, who has many, many friends who have PhDs, well, he does... Though outsiders might be like, what? These people are just monsters. And, well, they are. Well, at one point when he separates from his wife, he mentions that he hasn't become the star that he thought he was going to be. He hasn't broken through, and that he's tired of playing the game and of having to go to the department director's house and kind of kiss up to him, and that he wants his star moment, which is what leads him to what he does. Is he's hoping for this particular star moment. He's hoping for this particular star moment. So I think that they also get that right about some academics who really crave to have that star moment. Yeah. And it's in a very small sphere of having that star moment, but having that star moment is what he's craving. So then the other big thematic element...
So then the other big thematic element of this film I think we need to talk about is the visuals and the sheer, I would say, balls to the wall, uncontrolled, wild drug visual. I mean, that's something Ken Russell, I think, is, he's someone who is visual. I mean, that's something Ken Russell, I think, is, he's someone who is forgotten today, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Who, at the very least, made some very interesting films, almost on that, premise John Waters with Pink Flamingos, where it was like, we decided to make a movie that was like, what can we podcast?
Yeah, so Ken Russell, probably his biggest known, would be Tommy.
Yeah.
With The Who. Is probably, people of a certain generation, you say Tommy and they're going to know that movie, and they're going to know The Who. I actually forgot Ken Russell directed this film. Yeah. This is another film that I saw way too young. So there was definitely scenes that I remembered, but there's other stuff I didn't remember because I don't think I was ready for it. But Ken Russell would be known for Tommy, but Gothic is his other one for horror fans, and then some people might know Layer of the White Worm, but beyond that oeuvre, he's not a White Worm, but beyond that oeuvre, he's not a hugely
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, I still think that's getting into a niche,
that is very niche.
And then he does some body horror.
Inferno is a great film, yeah.
But he does some body horror, which, though, if you want body horror, people typically go to Cronenberg. And Cronenberg's the body horror, people typically go to Cronenberg. And Cronenberg's the bigger name in body horror because, in the sense of some of the body horror that you see, it's not as Cronenberg goes hard with his body horror and it's throughout the film, where this has moments of body horror and it's throughout the film, where this has moments of body horror with it. But to what you're saying, the visuals are very, very fascinating, and he does.
And I was thinking about that. So I was reading, and again, I mentioned this on Instagram, David Thompson's How to Watch a Movie, and talking about, for him, it's all changed.
Yeah.
And that now film is something we can experience on a device that fits in our pocket. Whereas when he started getting into a film, he talks about having read about Citizen Kane in a book, and then it was 5 years before he could see Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, this is 1980, 2 to 4 TV stations.
Yeah.
This is really even before the rise of cable. This is pre-MTV, just pre-MTV. And so it was part of the appeal at the time of this film would have been the psychedelic. I mean, there's points where, the William Hurt character parts where his, body is turning into that of some sort of missing link, half man, half ape, original human form. There's also points where he is just supposedly experience the mysteries of creation or the mysteries of creation or what does he say towards the end? The complete terror at the dawn of life.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. There's this existential thing that's happening where he kind of experiences unfiltered consciousness, unfiltered life, which is a lot of, psychedelic, lava lamp, oil and light bulb kind of dancing figures on the screen. There's parts where he sort of turns into stone and wails and all of this, which in 1980, those sorts of visuals, you had to buy that ticket to go see that film.
So the funny thing about it for me, though, is that so Barbarella has some of the same images, and the Matt Moose, as the evil woman says, the Matt Moose.
Yes.
The Matt Moose, some of the image Matt Moose.
Yes.
The Matt Moose, some of the images are actually the Matt Moose images in Barbarella. Even 2001: Space Odyssey.
Yes.
There was another film that popped in my head as well, but I think there was actually some other films that had experimented with that type of imagery with it. So if you saw those films, some of that same imagery came through.
Yeah.
The part actually that I like the best is because if you think about Yeah, we probably will take this Freud Jung.
Yeah, we have to go there too. Let's go.
We'll take this Freud Jung.
Yeah, we have to go there too. Let's go there.
But if you think about, part of Freud is that our dreams help us work through repressed memories and things that we're not ready to deal with. So at the beginning of the film, when he first does a deprivation tank, he is actually processing his actually great religious imagery that happens. That's fabulous, that I really adored. And so he sees the beast, and there's crucifixion, and there's all this other stuff that's happening. So that kind of was really interesting to me. When it's just like the flashes of light and things like that, that's not as interesting to me because I've seen it before in other films.
And we like every music player on your gateway computer had a visualizer. You know what I mean? It's true. That. I mean, that's what it was. If you remember, I mean, because you think even iTunes used to have it, Windows Media Player used to have it, Real Player, all of those music playing software, they have tunes on the computer. That is a lot of the visuals from Altered States.
It's true.
I mean, that's what it looks like. Actually if true. You want that with a semblance of a plot, see Altered States. If you missed that experience.
Well, I think the author of the film, who Patty, and I'm not too sure how to say his last name. He actually was the screenwriter for Network. So he's actually, that's his opus. He wrote the screenplay for Network.
We could do that one too.
The Altered States was actually, which is fascinating, he and Bob Fosse were friends, and they were joking about a way to work. Which is fascinating. He and Bob Fosse were friends, and they were joking about a way to work together. So they kind of, over dinner, came up with this idea, took it to Dino De Laurentiis, which... if you're a fan of interesting films, Dino De Laurentiis is kind of your go-to guy. And it kind of got shelved. And it kind of got shelved, and he turned it into a novel and then into a screenplay. He was so angry with Ken Russell that he actually did not want his name on the film, and so he used a pseudonym for the screenwriter, but he's the same person going through psychoanalyst therapy. And so I think you can see he wears Jung on his sleeve during this. So I think it's from his experience of going to a psychoanalyst that he brings in. Yeah. And
so the thumbnail sketch, for those of you we're aware of, and then there's 6/7 of our brain that we're not. And it's the repression, and it's memory, and it's maybe forbidden desire. And what Jung does is carves a piece of that out and says, no, actually there is also a shared conscious, unconscious mind that there are conscious, unconscious mind that there are, and that's how Jung gets into ideas of archetypes and synchronicity, and that maybe there is part of our brain that works together, and that if we go deep enough into our unconscious mind, we can find that collective unconscious. With our unconscious mind, we can find that collective unconscious, which very much there's this notion that if the William Hurt character keeps taking this drug and keeps going in that tank, he is going to find the one truth of all truths that unite us or something, and that'll be his big truth of all truths that unite us or something, and that'll be his big breakthrough. And
he has that speech at the restaurant. Yes. That's what he's talking about within the restaurant. And I'm going to say, yes, exactly, in a nutshell. And I think, for... Freud gets beat up a lot because I think everyone thinks about the Oedipal complex. But he was the first one to think about our unconscious and thinking about how we deal with things. And that has to be brought up in therapy, right? It wasn't that just that there's something wrong with you physically, that there actually could be an emotional state that is happening. So he's kind of the first one who brought that to the table, collective unconscious and the archetypes. And so William Hurt's character gives a big speech about that he's hoping to do this. And, the part of the collective unconscious is that you can get to the primordial ooze of what it means to be a human being. And that literally happens.
Early 2000s Real Player visualizer setting of the tunage of your choice, basically.
so with it, so there's kind of some interesting things he does. So Jung is known for the archetypes and then for dream interpretation. And so definitely Jung interpretation. And so definitely Jung was an influence on Timothy Leary and other people at that time. They kind of took what Jung was doing and brought it in to their fold and have their own theories around it. But Jung was looking at this collective unconsciousness, and with that comes the archetypes. And so even with him being in the salt water, that's one thing. So
you're from Philly.
My Philly salt water comes out is that's actually, Jung believes that's salt water to the collective unconscious. And so there's a lot of things in the film that I feel that kind of reference Jung along the way.
Yeah.
And so, part of it is we have to go there of the Great Mother. Mm-hmm. And so you think anything that is a container is mothers or motherhood. So like his first trip is in the cave. So that's definitely would be almost like a womb, right? And so the deprivation tanks are definitely a womb, and he is reborn, and things like that. But on the other side of the mother, the Great Mother, is that there's the Great Mother of bringing life, but there's also the Great Mother who brings death. And destruction. And so there's a scene where he's hallucinating his wife and he's in the cave. We should mention that he does go to South America, is it?
Yeah, or some like vaguely
America, is it?
Yeah, or some like vaguely non-modern global south. I mean, there is a weird colonialism of this film I think we also have to talk about, where he goes amongst the savages or whatever, and there is this weird racial othering of other cultures, and there is this weird racial othering of other cultures, and this very kind of retrograde Orientalism of he goes out with the others. Yeah. And is it, a reference to Peru and Anothusia or Yahe?
Yeah, most likely.
Yahe.
Yeah, most likely.
But you just have this like almost like Indiana Jones, where there is just this mismatch of contemporary savages or whatever, and body paint, all of those visual tropes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this film has that. People still living in the world, wherever that is. And yes, they're in a cave.
Yes.
And yes, they have body paint. And yes, there's a hint of cannibalism in their rituals. And a boiling cauldron and cave paintings. And all of that colonial consciousness, it plugs right in and uses it as a plot device.
And so he meets this tribe that's using a drug that they create, and they use the drug to get to the collective unconscious. They all have the same trip together. And so he, as the white man, joins in, but he can't actually, it seems like, just goes off the rails with it, and has this, so his wife, he has a hallucination of her, and she's transforms from a lizard.
She's naked a lot in this film, too. There's a lot of nudity in this film.
There is. I think this was her first film as well, too. But she's...
nudity in this film.
There is. I think this was her first film as well, too. But she starts off as a lizard, then transforms into a woman. So there's like all this strange imagery, and does he feel like he's being consumed by his wife and their relationship? And so...
Which is not, and there's no gender politics in that at all.
At all. And then, of course, he has visions of hell, and he has all these other visions that happen. So, these, even some of his visions bring in the Jungian archetypes. Now, I should say I'm not a fan of the collective unconscious. I actually, from primordial state that we can get to. Now, I do believe that, there's inherited instinctual things that happen, right? So, like, if you have, many people are afraid of, like, birds flapping around their head, and that's probably an, instinctual thing. Like, we don't want that to happen. Yeah. And then with Jung, like, swans, which is used a ton in films and in fairy tales. I mean, Michael Myers, Jason, they're all shadow
I think
figures.
that's the thing is I think, and Jung is also now a problematic figure because of Jordan Peterson,
right?
And this attempt, there is this attempt in some archetypal criticism to kind of maybe counteract postmodernism, counteract multiculturalism, or cultural pluralism. That no, there are eternal truths and eternal truths and eternal figures and eternal ideas, eternal truths and eternal figures and eternal ideas. When in some cases, is it, you watch like a Jordan Peterson video and he's doing 101 level, or actually 12th grade in high school level, like, let's spot the common themes.
Right.
In multiple texts, Common themes.
Right.
In multiple texts, Comparative freshman essays or something.
Yeah.
And so that is problematic in our time.
Yeah.
Because some of it is, are we getting to internal truth, or no, are we just spotting a bunch of common themes and popular tropes?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, I bring up the shadow because, you think about, like, what were the purposes of like, fairy tales and fables. They were to scare you into doing the right thing, right?
Yeah.
And those always have a shadow figure, whether it's the wolf or something else to get you. And is it? I don't view that as times that we're used to.
Yes, because the device kind of works.
Yeah.
Which then, for me, is then the whole film, because at the end of the film, right, so it's like, they get married. Well, okay, so the William Hurt character fucks a grad student.
Yes.
Which is a thing that has happened in higher ed, which is weird and problematic now, but was once. And then from there, you have that he is then dissatisfied with family life. He has children, and it's just like, yeah. I mean, that's the weird thing. Like, time sort of passes in this movie, but the characters don't age. But then suddenly there's like a 6-year-old.
Yes.
That's there, and he's still the same and doing crazy hallucinogenic drugs.
And they're far enough in their careers that they can afford for both of them to travel to other countries.
Yes.
And expend extended time there.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And so he's disinterested, and she still loves him, and he's like, no, I need bigger truths.
Yeah.
And then there's this, like, super bizarre final...
Yeah.
And then there's this, like, super bizarre final scene where... and it's like, this is like Kierkegaardian levels of selling out, It's like, we don't know what the world is, so I might as well just be a Christian. In this one, he's like, I've seen the absolute terror of the beginning of life. Goes on this, and he's like, I love you and I need you. And then he goes on this trip, and then they touch, and she becomes Lava Woman and is suffering, and then he beats himself against the wall like that Aha video, but
exactly Take on Me,
but Altered States came first. He smashes into the naked in the hallway, and they're like, I love you, and heteronormativity, and it's like, there's an infinite terror of being alive, but we can have a family and it'll be nice. And then they'll just go buy a Volvo station wagon. That's the cut scene after the end. That's the denouement at the end, and that's it. And so it's like, you can hallucinate drugs, but really you need to settle down and form a family. And that becomes this, like, there's so many of these weird mixed messages in this film, And in some ways, I know when we encountered it, in the 90s, this would have had a life on VHS because, dude, stoner movie, because, dude, we could do drugs and then watch this movie about doing drugs and it'll look really cool, which is, and you can listen to Pink Floyd too, and it's the drugs that make Pink Floyd cool when you're doing drugs. That's every time I rip on Pink Floyd to another music fan, it eventually gets to the point of, dude, but when you're tripping balls.
Same with Fish.
Sorry, folks.
Yeah.
But dude, when you're tripping balls, when you're tripping balls, fluorescent lights are interesting. As is perhaps Altered. If you don't have access to those kind of visuals, and if you want to trip and you want to see a film that maybe has these pretensions of we're going to shatter reality or whatever and get to the real truth, I understand that appeal. But I think for our big five questions, I mean, to watch this film again in 2020 I don't know. I just don't know. And so, yeah, is it camp? Is it retro, a classic, or just an old movie?
Yeah, right. So this is such a tough question. I've been contemplating this one today. Because it has pretensions, right? Like, it's supposed to be this big, important film. It did make some money, not a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the screenwriter did network, and he did two other Oscar-winning films, right? So there's, like, a prestige with it. Part of me just feels like it's an old film.
I'm the same way. I think it's just an old movie.
Yeah.
And... yeah, I think it's just an old movie.
Yeah.
We watch. Yes. Well, we're not going to leave it because there's 4 more questions. So, yeah, what about the social political distance? Bechtel test, the race. I mean, I talked earlier about the weird colonial... because there's also then this, like, that the modern... this goes back to, like, Rousseau, right? That the modern intellect needs to get to a truth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so busted. Right now.
And I'm reading a book right now, and they're talking about for Africans and non-white people back in like the 1700s. There was the curse theory was very popular, and like Ham and all this theory was very popular, and like Ham and all this other stuff. And so there's definitely this kind of like massive othering that's happening.
Yes.
Though you have this brief experience with it, there is definitely this othering that's happening. The gender for me is very strange as well. So the women that you encounter are his colleague's wife, who's always pregnant. So like anytime we've encountered his wife, she's pregnant and does actually drink. It was this late alcohol, 70s, 80s, drink alcohol and smoke. But Emily, his wife, when they meet, she's a grad student. She's actually almost done her dissertation.
She's infinitely seducible and easily seducible.
Exactly. And, she mentions that she's 24, and he's like, wow, I was 25 when I got my dissertation. So, and he's like, wow, I was 25 when I got my dissertation. So, and she's obviously a really smart woman, but at the end of the day, like, any of her conversations with the colleague's wife are about her relationship with Eddie. Yeah. And then also, to what you say with the ending, it comes down to Paul, and she's
which is Faust,
and she's very much she mentions his obsession with Faust, but very much like her character it's really focused on her love for Eddie, where she just got back from Africa at one point in the movie
and was doing serious groundbreaking research,
and it's really about observe him taking the drug in the deprivation tank. Things go super, super crazy, and she is willing to sacrifice her life for him because her love is just so great for him. Even at the end, when she turns into lava, her love is so great for him.
And as soon as she's no longer a lava woman, she's smiling at him. Lava woman, she's smiling at him adoringly. Like, were you just going through this really incredibly painful experience of being lava? And then suddenly, oh, yay, we're together.
Well, and also, like...
other, which is like... And he saved her.
He saved her.
And so she just loves it. And he saved her.
He saved her.
And so she just loves it so much.
And he leaves her because he wants more from life. And part of him wanting more from life is sleeping with co-eds. And so... yeah, he does sleep with one of his He's not a guy that it's worth going through all this for. He's not a guy that it's worth going through all this for. And so that part of it is, for me, very problematic. Because I'm like, if she was my friend, I'd be like, leave. Like, why are you even sticking around with
the kids and go?
Like, why are you sticking around with this guy? He's not a good guy. Because it's like he wrote, it's cool. Like, you start out and like, oh, this is cool. She has her doctorate and she can go toe to toe with him. But really, it's just that, she's enamored with him. And part of me feels like he wrote this character because we needed to have someone who was worthy of Eddie. And so, like, she had able to get a position at Harvard like him. So she had to be worthy of this superhuman, of this Superman that is Eddie, because he's just so brilliant. And so when you take it in that way, it's horrible, right? That's like really, really horrible.
Yeah. But I mean, at the time, normal, expected, unfortunate ed still struggles with its patriarchal, colonial tendencies. They are well on display in this film from 1980.
And I have to mention the scene where he has his student in bed with him. They've obviously just had sex. He gets up because he cannot control the morphing anymore, and so he'll have these times where the morphing happens.
Yes, where his body reverts to this.
And so he's having problems, goes to the bathroom,
figure.
and multiple times she's like, Dr. Jessup, are you okay? How creepy is that? How creepy is that she's like, Dr. Jessup, are you okay? How creepy is that? How creepy is that she's a student sleeping with her professor, and she still
recognizes
him
title.
as Dr. Jessup. She doesn't even get to call him Eddie. She calls him Dr. Jessup. It's so weird.
Yes. But again, this time. So question 3, the technical distance. But again, this time. So question 3, the technical distance.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead if you want to start with it.
I have to say, like, I usually say CGI has ruined horror films, CGI has ruined cinema.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the one movie say, you know what, a little CGI, little contemporary CGI could almost make this film work.
Yeah, there's a couple scenes where he, because he's like, he does morph into primordial man, I guess, as well. And so morphing process, and then it's almost like, is he morphing back to the primordial ooze? And so he kind of loses structure, I guess is the best way to say it. That makeup is so bad. Like that, and it's very noticeable. You're like, wow. Now, I think the primitive man makeup isn't horrible, but that...
Equalizer stuff. I mean, it's still interesting to look at, and the film was shot in Technicolor, which I think helps preserve some of it. But if you're going total wild, uncontrolled hallucination, unstructured... So much of it is that sort of 60s psychedelia oil lamp stuff.
Yeah, and there's a couple scenes where it just looks like the like machine got fuzzy, like as they were working, like kind of thing. So I definitely think that like it's an example of where CGI might have
helped.
Yeah.
I think another way this film's dated or not, I think, we talk about the room test, if there's plot, if there are artifacts, things in the mise-en-scène that make us, like, kind of take us out of the film. We watched the drug hallucination visuals it was 1980. This is what they could do. This was probably cutting edge for 1980.
Yeah.
This was really trippy. But we've seen better things since then. And I think most of it, for me, is the social, is the social relationships between the characters of the room, and this sort of schlockiness, True Love Conquers All, that...
Yeah, I think at one point in the film, because I was getting so annoyed with the characters, I mentioned that I liked the couch. I was like, that's a cool couch.
They do have that, that's the other...
I was like, that's a cool couch.
They do have that, that's the other thing, like, academics having that, like, sob driving sexy style that academics sometimes have or are supposed to have. They do that dress up very well. So
I think they have this is kind of branching multiple questions. The men are also a little problematic, right? So like Mason, who is a physician, he works at the Harvard Medical School, right? So knows what he's doing. Spends most of his time just yelling. Yeah. It's like, I mean, he's frustrated with his friend, but literally his character is just yelling most of the time. And then his other colleague, whose name I forget, is just so passive most of the time. Yeah. And then you have Eddie, who is supposed to be the boy genius, who's unhinged. So it's really hard. Like, there's times in the movie where I was taken out of the movie because I'm like, oh, great, he's screaming again. Or, oh, great.
Oh, great, he's Ape Man again. Oh,
right, exactly.
Oh, he might kill that security guard. Okay.
The maintenance guy seemed nice. He seemed like a likable character.
The maintenance guy seemed all right and normal.
Yes, I think because it was really, the characters in many ways, in their own ways, were kind of insufferable. There was moments that I was definitely taken out of the film and noticed other stuff with it.
And, you know, and as far as the role of technology in the film, I mean, as far as the role of technology in the film, I mean, I think there would have been just the computers would have been better.
Yeah.
Looked better. They would have had like futuristic Apple products as opposed to computers that were rooms full of switches. Which in 1980 computers were rooms full of switches.
True.
Which leads us to our final question. Question 5. Is it a keeper?
Oy.
Does this fall in that rare category of, and maybe this is part of question 1, camp, retro, classic, and all. Yes, it's just an old movie. Things that are important and there are things that are good. And that Venn diagram is not a perfect circle.
This is so true. I do think it's an important movie. I don't think it's good. And so I think it's important in the sense of just the film work of Ken Russell and kind of how he tackles topics. And the screenwriter really disagreed, but the screenwriter had complete creative control over the script. And so no dialogue could be changed. And so Ken Russell, in being annoyed with it, if he didn't like the dialogue, he had them either eat or rush through the dialogue if he didn't like it. So I wonder, like, if they were able to work together, would it have worked a little bit better? Yes, would
it made more sense?
But I do think there's a sense of I do think you know it is a modern take on Jekyll and Hyde, which I think is kind of interesting in the sense. And there is something there. He is trying, though for me in sloppy ways, to bring in Jung and that theory around it. So I think there's some unsuccessful things that happen with it. But I do think in terms of horror films, there's a place for it. But I don't think horror films, there's a place for it. But I don't think, I don't know. What is your thought?
I agree. And I think to go back to your point about Cronenberg, I think body horror and psychological horror and is the mind a place of terror. I mean, I think it's a lofty mind a place of terror. I mean, I think it's a lofty but failed attempt.
Yeah. And
I do have a soft spot in, I mean, you know, we need to I think maybe try to track down a copy of Unbreakable on VHS.
We do.
For this podcast. I have a soft spot for M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
Who is at times quite ambitious, but also quite sloppy and quite failed. And it's maybe it's also the idea is this film an interesting failure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of thinking about it. And I think, just my comment about thinking about it in the history of horror. So like that, Halloween is right around that time.
Yeah.
And so the horror took that veer
Halloween, Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th. Yeah, so Hollywood, like horror films, took that road of the slasher, and unfortunately, I love Halloween, like one of my favorites. I love Friday the 13th. What ended up happening with slasher films? They became stupid and they became
formulaic and
they became silly, and so this is fascinating because this is at the same time as the rise of the slasher film. And what is now embraced in horror is this more domestic horror, because it is a domestic
right now.
Yeah, it's a domestic horror in many ways because it's this relationship and
it's a family
and what's happening to the family dynamic because of one person in the relationship. It does psychological horror pretty well, and I think, and it's not, if you want, like, it's not for me, it's not necessarily a scary film. It's not necessarily a scary film. It's an interesting film in that, and so I think now there's much more focus on psychological horror, domestic horror, in kind of that slasher film has gone away. Saul's not even big anymore. Lately have been looking at dynamics and relationships and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So I do think it has, I do think it's a failed film. I think that's a great way to put it. But you can see its imprint on other films as you go forward. And I'm sure there's people who have seen it. Like I want to watch this. Was this any influence on you? I do feel like it has, and I think it's one that horror fans do try to watch because it's known for that focus on the psychological.
Yeah. Interesting.
Shyamalan has had plenty
interesting
of
failures. So I think if you're looking to be entertained and looking for a popcorn movie, let this one go. Let this one go. But I think if it's I want to look up the importance of the, or at least something that is a little off in an interesting way and historically important it deserves, and which I think is how much of Ken Russell's career. A little bit off, but historically important. I think we're fans of that sort of... I mean, it's at least a remarkable experience.
Yeah.
If you want a good movie, okay. But maybe sometimes good's a little boring. Good's a little boring.
Go see... If you want a good horror, domestic horror, go see Pyewacket. But, if you want something that is an interesting failure, is a little off, check it out. Right.
I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. See you next time.